Snow fell in a steady hush over the Siberian valley, blanketing shattered trees and rusted wreckage in white silence. The wind cut like knives through the narrow mountain pass, but Sergeant Viktor Raskov stood unmoving behind the frozen sandbags, eyes narrowed beneath his Ushanka. Frost crusted the seams of his coat and beard. He'd stood guard here every night for a week, watching the horizon for the glint of Empire drones. None had come yet. The others in the outpost said it was madness, holding this position with no air support, no drones, no energy shields. But madness had carried Earth this far. The orbital cities were already glass, the skies lost to the shimmering black swarms of the Galactic Empire. All that remained were these forgotten valleys, these patches of scorched ground and broken men who refused to kneel. Viktor exhaled through his nose, steam clouding the air. The weapon beside him stood like a monument to another time. A restored M134, 6 barrels of defiance mounted on a steel tripod, retrofitted with hand-cranked priming gears and modern composite bearings. A Gatling gun, real, old-fashioned kinetic death. It was utterly outdated by Imperial standards. But they had never faced it. Not like this. Boots crunched behind him. Private Lena Kowalski emerged from the bunker, wrapping her scarf tighter around her neck. Young but tough. Too young for war, Viktor thought, though they all were now. Still no sign, she asked. Nothing but wind and snow. Viktor's voice was a low growl, barely above the breeze. He didn't look away from the pass. She stepped beside him, her gaze settling on the gun. The belts of ammunition coiled like brass serpents around its base. Command says they're moving troops east. Could be a feint. It's always a feint. Until it's not. She didn't answer. Instead, she rubbed her gloved hands together and glanced up at the darkening sky. Do you really think this thing will stop them? Viktor finally turned. His pale eyes, like shards of cracked ice, met hers. No, I think it'll remind them what pain feels like. Inside the bunker, the others were finishing the evening checks. There were 5 of them now, 6 if you counted Dragan, who hadn't spoken since the orbital bombardment took his family. They were engineers, medics, scavengers. Not soldiers, not really. But they had chosen this pass for a reason. It was narrow, hard to fly through, and lined with craggy outcrops where old artillery had once stood. Now, it was wired with crude sensors and hardwired mines, all powered by car batteries and salvage parts. The Empire called Earth primitive. Viktor called it adaptive. He ducked inside the concrete structure, brushing snow from his shoulders. The heat inside was weak, but welcome. Petro, their tech, was hunched over a console that was more wires than casing. An ancient analog radio flickered with static. Any word? Viktor asked. Petro shook his head. They're jamming everything outside the valley. We've only got line-of-sight relay to forward base Foxtrot. Then we're blind, Lena muttered. No, said Viktor. We see enough. On the wall, they'd pinned old satellite images, crude maps, and intelligence sketches. A web of lines and markers showing patrol routes, likely assault paths, and fallback positions. Viktor's finger traced the northern ridge, where the Empire's scouts had last been spotted. They're coming, he said. They just haven't decided if we're worth the trouble yet. Outside, the temperature dropped further. The wind picked up. The sun vanished behind steel-gray clouds. Time passed slowly, like the grind of a trigger mechanism, inching toward inevitability. At nightfall, the sky turned black, and with it came the hum. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but Viktor heard it, low and rhythmic, like the wings of a dying god. He moved without a word, grabbing his rifle and slinging it over his shoulder. Lena followed him. By the time they reached the firing line, the sound had grown louder. They're using drop skiffs, Viktor said. Low altitude, high speed. Lena blinked. They're not even cloaked. They think we're dead already. He signaled the others. In seconds, the crew moved into position, calm and mechanical. They knew their roles. Petro manned the spotlights. Dragan checked the crank-fed ammo belts. Lena slid into the trench beside Viktor, her breath fast but steady. Then, between the trees, came movement, sleek black shapes against the snow. lit by blue thrusters and flashing with the green sigils of the Imperial banner. The first skiff touched down, its landing struts punching into the ice. The soldiers disembarked, tall, silver-armored figures with glowing visors and plasma rifles held at the ready. Viktor didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand down on the gun's priming lever. With a deafening roar, the Gatling gun came alive. Barrels spun, shells ejected, and the night exploded in a storm of thunder and brass. The bullets tore through the first formation in seconds. Armor cracked, flesh shredded, bones pulverized. Screams rose over the whine of plasma weapons too slow to activate. The second skiff tried to lift off. Viktor adjusted his aim and fired. Bullets punched through its engine casing, and it spiraled into a tree with a fiery bloom. The others scattered, diving for cover in terrain that offered none. Still the barrel spun. Still the dead piled. But they kept coming. The third wave was faster, more coordinated. Plasma shots hissed over the trench, melting snow and searing stone. One struck the bunker roof, sending debris raining down. Viktor ducked, then rose again, lips tight, eyes blazing. Lena screamed. A trooper had reached the edge of the trench. Viktor dropped his sidearm and grabbed his knife. The Imperial soldier swung a glowing blade, but Viktor drove his knife under the visor. Blood hissed into the snow. He turned back to the gun and pulled the charging lever. Empty. Jammed. Petro, he barked. On it. The tech sprinted through fire and smoke, diving into the maintenance hatch beneath the gun. Sparks flew. A moment later, the gun roared again. The Imperials faltered. One of them screamed into a translator, calling for evac. Another bolted, only to be cut down by a burst of kinetic fury. Then silence. The survivors fled. Smoke rose into the night. The snow around them was soaked red, the bodies of aliens strewn like broken dolls. Viktor stood beside the gun, his chest heaving. Lena stared, wide-eyed, her face streaked with soot and blood. They ran, she whispered. They'll be back, Viktor said. Petro coughed and sat beside the ammo crates, his hands trembling, but not laughing. Viktor looked down at the smoking barrels of the Gatling gun, then to the shattered remains of alien armor. No, he agreed. Not anymore. The cold returned. The stars above blinked into view, distant and indifferent. But in that frozen trench, amid death and ruin, humanity had spoken. Not with words, but with fire and steel. And it was only the beginning. The sun rose behind a wall of gray clouds, casting little warmth and even less hope. The valley was quiet again, but not still. Smoke lingered in the air, curling from the wreckage of Imperial skiffs half buried in the snow. The scent of scorched metal and ozone clung to the ruins, and underneath it, the stench of blood. Viktor Raskov stood amidst the aftermath with the same grim stillness he had worn before the battle. His boots crunched softly over frozen ground as he surveyed the destruction. 27 bodies. Not all were whole. The Empire's soldiers bled like anyone else. Purple, viscous, and thick, but they fell just the same under the Gatling's roar. A part of him took satisfaction in that. The rest simply filed it away. Lena crouched beside one of the dead, prying a curved blade from the alien's rigid fingers. Her own hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. The blade was unfamiliar, but the blood on it was red. Human. Qasim died here, she said quietly. I found his tag. Viktor gave a slow nod. He remembered the young scout, nervous but eager. Always had a pencil behind his ear, sketching things they didn't need. Bury him before the frost takes hold. We don't have time to dig, Petro said from behind them. He was nursing a gash across his scalp, a blood-soaked rag pressed tightly against it. Another drop is coming. You heard the transmission. Viktor turned sharply. From who? Foxtrot relay. Before it went dark. Interference cleared for 5 seconds, just long enough to catch the code. A dreadnought's in orbit. Lena's eyes flicked up toward the sky, as if she might see it looming there. They're sending reinforcements? They're sending judgment, Petro muttered. Viktor's jaw clenched. Let them. They returned to the bunker, sealing the hatch behind them as the wind howled louder. Inside, the mood had shifted. No one celebrated the victory. It had been a message, not a triumph. A scream into the void telling the Empire that Earth was not quite dead. And the Empire, like all tyrants, would respond with fury. Dragan sat cross-legged on the floor, methodically cleaning the gun's barrels. His face remained blank, but his movements were precise, reverent. Lena joined him, laying the curved blade beside a crate. Her fingers brushed against the barrel casing, still warm from the fight. "I saw them hesitate," she said. "They didn't expect it. That noise, the way it tore through them, they froze." Viktor stood near the entrance, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. The tremor annoyed him, but he didn't hide it. "They've never fought an enemy who remembers pain," he said. "Kinetic weapons aren't clean. They don't cauterize. They explode flesh, shatter bone. There's no dignity in dying to one." "Then maybe that's what they need," Lena muttered. Petro looked up from his radio array. "We've got 6 belts left. After that, it's dry. We'll make them count." The hours dragged, filled with restless preparation. Ammunition was rechecked, the trenches reinforced, every mine and trap rearmed. No drones came. No scouts crept down the valley. But above, the clouds pulsed with flickers of light. Orbital movement. They were watching, measuring. By dusk, the wind had dropped. Snow fell again, softly now, as if the world itself was trying to pretend nothing had happened. But the sky had changed. A line of flame burned briefly across the horizon. Re-entry trails. Multiple. "They're not probing anymore," Petro said. "They're committing." Lena stood at the bunker door, rifle slung low, scarf pulled tight. "How many?" "3 pods. Heavy infantry. For minutes to contact." "Any armor?" "Not yet." Viktor stepped out into the snow, his coat flaring in the breeze. The Gatling gun was ready. The ammo belts coiled, the firing pin reset. The barrel had been cooled and oiled. It stood like a relic among the rubble, tall and defiant. Dragan followed him out without a word, gripping the field wrench. Petro stayed inside, fingers dancing over the radio dial. Static hummed like a ghost. The first pod landed with a bone-rattling impact, snow geysering outward. Imperial troops spilled from the hatch in synchronized formation, rifles raised. This time, they didn't hesitate. They fired as they advanced, plasma bolts lighting up the darkness in arcs of green and blue. Viktor waited. Not yet. The line was too far. He needed them closer. Lena crouched beside him, teeth clenched, counting under her breath. Dragan loaded the next belt with steady hands. When the second pod landed, Viktor saw the glint of heavier armor, shock troopers. He inhaled once, let the cold burn his lungs, and yanked the trigger. The Gatling gun screamed again. Barrels spun, shells ejected in streams. The front line of Imperials disintegrated. Armor plates shattered under high-velocity impact, torsos torn apart before they could scream. The shock troopers returned fire, but it was erratic. Their formations collapsed under the unrelenting hail. One soldier reached the trench, leaping over the sandbags with impossible speed. Lena caught him midair with a burst from her rifle, dropping him like a puppet with its strings cut. The third pod landed farther back. Viktor adjusted the aim, sweeping left to right. The barrels glowed orange, the snow around them vaporizing into steam. For a moment, the battlefield was a furnace. Then silence. The last of the soldiers fell. No survivors. No retreat. Petro's voice crackled from the radio. Sky just lit up again. "They're not pulling out." Viktor looked up. A shadow passed over the stars, massive and slow. "They're sending a walker," Petro said. "Big one." "How big?" "Dreadnought drop platform. This one's meant to erase terrain." Lena swore under her breath. "We can't take that on." Viktor said nothing. His gaze remained locked on the dark horizon, where the wind had stilled and the smoke had settled. He looked back at the gun, silent now, its barrel smoking, its frame trembling faintly from the heat. "Maybe not," he said, "but we'll make them bleed for every meter." He knelt beside the weapon, ran his hand over the brass casings. Each one was a story, a defiance, a memory made tangible. This gun, once a museum piece, had become a symbol of something the Empire could not understand. Raw, unfiltered will. Lena stepped beside him. Her eyes no longer held fear, only fury. "What's the plan?" she asked. Viktor exhaled smoke into the night. "We draw it in. We blind it. Then we cripple the bastard. We've only got one belt left. Then we aim for the heart." Inside, Petro adjusted the frequency, trying to catch any last warning from the remaining outposts. He paused for a moment, listening to the static, then spoke into the transmitter. "To all resistance units in range. They're coming heavy. We held the line. We hurt them. Keep hurting them. Show them what Earth remembers." The transmission cut. Outside, the stars had vanished behind a curtain of artificial clouds. Something vast was descending. The ground trembled ever so faintly. Viktor rose, slinging his rifle over his back, his hand resting on the cooling Gatling. "They thought this was a relic," he said quietly. "Let's make it a legend." The wind picked up again, bringing with it the sound of mechanical engines and distant thunder. The final battle had not yet begun, but the air already smelled of fire, and the gun was waiting. The sky broke open with a low, concussive roar as the Empire's walker began its descent. Cloud churned, split by the burning engines of the dreadnought drop platform. A shape emerged through the ash-gray sky, vast, insectal, and terrible. It was not a machine built for maneuverability. It was a monument of dominance, descending like judgment made metal. The snow beneath it melted in waves as its heat bled into the earth. In the trench, Viktor Raskov stared through his field lenses, watching the thing land. The walker hit the frozen ground with a seismic thud that shivered up his legs and into his bones. Its four legs, jointed like some alien arachnid, unfolded slowly, each step deliberate, thunderous. Twin plasma cannons, the size of passenger trains, locked forward from its flanks. From its underbelly, smaller drones dismounted. Scuttling machines built to flush out resistance, sweep the snow, and paint targets for precision fire. Petro's voice crackled from the bunker, sharp with disbelief. "It's a Ravager class. We're not supposed to even know those exist. One of those took out New Delhi in 20 minutes. "Then we'll have to move faster," Viktor replied. Beside him, Lena reloaded her rifle with trembling fingers. She kept her gaze on the walker's silhouette, her breath shallow and fast. "How do we stop that?" she asked. "We don't stop it," Viktor said. "We break its knee." He stepped back from the trench, boots crunching through the snow, and gestured for Petro to bring the crate. Inside were the last 6 belts of ammunition, high-density rounds wrapped in cloth, heavier than the others. "Uranium tips," Petro said as he opened the lid, "scavenged from an old naval reactor core. These weren't meant to be fired from anything less than an autocannon." "They'll have to do," Viktor replied, feeding the belt into the gun with steady, deliberate hands. Dragan knelt silently at the other side of the tripod, checking the barrel alignment, tightening the clamps. He hadn't spoken in hours, but his focus was unbroken. The gun was part of him now, an extension of something he'd lost, and something he still had to protect. The ground trembled again. The Ravager was advancing. Each step left cratered footprints in a valley, steam rising around it in hissing bursts. Its targeting sensors glowed green across its forward panel, scanning for movement. When it found none, it opened fire, not with precision, but with annihilation. The first blast vaporized a ridge 50 meters north. Trees, rocks, snow, all vanished in a single pulse of white-hot energy. The second scorched a line of mines they'd buried earlier, triggering a chain reaction of useless detonations. Smoke poured into the valley, thick and black. "They're trying to blind us," Lena muttered. "No," Viktor corrected. "They're trying to erase everything." He turned to Petro. "Set the jammers. Short range. Give us 5 minutes of confusion." Petro nodded and slid back into the bunker. A moment later, a low hum filled the air, subtle but pulsing. The walker slowed slightly, uncertain. "Now," Viktor said, "let's move." Together, they dragged the Gatling gun from its mount and hoisted it onto the wheeled sled. It was never meant to be mobile, but necessity had erased those limitations. Every step was agony. The gun weighed more than a man, and the snow fought them with every drag. They pulled it to the base of a ridge, where visibility narrowed and the walker would be forced to pivot. It was a choke point, natural and deadly. Viktor positioned the gun, crouched low, and motioned for Dragan to begin cranking the battery. The barrels began to spin, slowly at first, building to speed. The uranium rounds fed in with a heavy clack, clack, clack. The Ravager crested the ridge, massive and unbothered. It spotted them almost immediately. One of its drone scouts pinged, and a red targeting laser danced across the snow, searching for flesh. "Now!" Viktor shouted. The Gatling gun screamed to life. The uranium rounds shot through the air like thunder, and the impact was immediate. One of the walker's legs, armored in alloy 10 inches thick, took the first burst. The shelling cracked it, splintered it, then punctured through the joint where cables and servos met steel. The machine staggered. Its weight shifted violently to one side. The drones reacted instantly, scrambling toward the humans with unearthly speed, plasma cutters glowing. Dragan, still silent, stood to intercept. He pulled the pin on a makeshift incendiary grenade and ran straight at the nearest drone. The explosion tore through the snow, taking 2 of the machines with him. "Dragan!" Lena screamed, but there was no time. Viktor re-aimed and fired again, tearing into the next joint of the walker. A gout of molten fluid burst from the wound, spraying into the snow. Sparks rained down as the Ravager tried to compensate, rebalancing itself. Its forward cannon pivoted, charging. "Down!" Viktor shouted and tackled Lena behind the trench just as the plasma beam seared past. The sled vaporized. The gun was flung backward, the tripod snapped in half. Lena coughed, spitting snow and blood. Her jacket had caught fire, but she beat out with numb hands. "We're done," she rasped. "No," Viktor said, rising slowly. "Not yet." He staggered to the gun, dragging it upright with one arm. The tripod was broken, so he planted it in the snow, propping it against a dead log. The barrels were still intact. The ammo was still fed. The Ravager loomed above, swaying on its crippled leg. Smoke poured from its joints. Its plasma cannons began to rotate again, searching. Petro appeared beside Viktor, one eye swollen shut, blood running from his ear. "This is suicide," he said. "No," Viktor replied, aiming the gun. "It's a reckoning." He pulled the trigger. The final belt roared through the barrels, each shot aimed at the walker's optical core. Sparks cascaded down like rain. The core cracked, then shattered. One last round punched through the internal systems, and the Ravager let out a sound. Not a scream, but a shuddering groan of failing hydraulics and ruptured coolant. The machine collapsed. It fell slowly, one limb at a time, as if refusing to admit defeat. Then it crashed into the snow, shaking the valley with its final breath. Silence followed. No drones, no weapons, no sound but the wind. Lena stumbled to Viktor's side. He was slumped over the gun, one hand still on the trigger, blood seeping through his coat. "Viktor," she whispered. He didn't answer, but his chest rose and fell slowly. From the bunker, Petro emerged, eyes wide, looking up at the smoking wreck of the walker. "They're going to feel that," he said. Lena nodded. "We just told the galaxy something they won't forget." Behind them, the wind shifted. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, carried by a gentler breeze. The Gatling gun, now cracked and scorched, sat half buried in the ice, its work complete. But the fight wasn't over. Far above, Imperial satellites blinked offline. Transmission lines were quiet. In the dark corners of occupied cities, whispers began to rise. They had sent a monster, and Earth had killed it. The morning after the Ravager fell, the valley was silent in a way that felt unnatural. No distant engines, no patrol drones buzzing overhead. The snow had stopped falling, but the clouds hung low and heavy, casting the battlefield in dim gray light. Smoke curled from the shattered husk of the walker, its massive frame still cooling, limbs bent and twisted like a felled god. Where it had stood, the ground was scorched and cratered. The snow turned to blackened slush and frozen mud. Viktor Raskov awoke to the sting of antiseptic. He was lying on a cot inside the bunker, his coat removed, chest bandaged tightly beneath a wool blanket. Every breath was a knife in his ribs. The air was bitter, and the generator's hum had gone quiet, the last of its fuel spent. Beside him, Lena sat on an overturned crate, her face pale but resolute, hands caked with dried blood. His or hers, he couldn't tell. "You're alive," she said, as if trying to convince herself. "For now," Viktor croaked. She handed him a dented canteen. He drank. It burned going down, and it wasn't water. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't care. "Petro's out scouting," she continued. "No sign of reinforcements. No transmissions. No orbital movement. They're regrouping," Viktor said, coughing. "Or retreating." She didn't respond to that. Instead, she stood and walked to the narrow sliver of window carved into the bunker wall. From there, she could see the gun, half buried in snow and soot, its barrels warped, casing scorched. It looked like a relic from another age, a ruin among ruins. And yet it had held. It had spoken when nothing else could. "You were right," Lena said, still watching. They didn't expect pain. They didn't know fear. Until now. Viktor sat up slowly, every movement measured, deliberate. "They'll adapt. They always do. Then so will we." There was no celebration, no cheers, no victory speech. Just the sound of wind through cracked concrete, the slow drip of melted snow seeping through the ceiling, and the weight of something unspoken pressing down on them. When Petro returned, his face was grim, but there was a flicker of fire behind his eyes. "I picked up a signal," he said. "Not theirs. Ours. Resistance bands all across Eurasia are mobilizing. They saw the footage. Someone leaked it. Drone feed, bunker cam, even helmet POV. The whole battle. It's spreading." Viktor leaned forward. "What are they saying? That we brought down a god with a gun made of steel and spite. That Earth isn't dead yet. That we can bleed them." Lena stepped forward, her voice low. "They're calling it the Siege of Black Valley." Petro nodded. "And they're calling you the Iron Sergeant." Viktor closed his eyes, not out of pride, but exhaustion. "I didn't do it for a name." "No," Petro said, "but the name's doing something for them." By dusk, the sky had cleared. The stars returned, blinking coldly above the mountains. For the first time in weeks, the orbital shadows were gone. The Empire's satellite net had moved elsewhere, perhaps reeling, perhaps retreating, or perhaps preparing something worse. They spent that night outside, huddled around a fire built from broken crates and alien plating. The heat was thin, but the company was solid. For a while, it didn't speak. Just watched the flames, letting silence wrap around them like a thin, fraying blanket. Finally, Lena broke it. "Do you think he'll come back?" Viktor didn't answer right away. He stared at the wreck of the Ravager, barely visible now in the gloom. "Yes," he said. "Not like before. Not with arrogance. But they'll return. And next time, they'll know we bite." Petro added a new piece of fuel to the fire, a scorched Empire banner torn from the Walker's Hull. The flames licked up its fabric, curling the sigils into ash. "They're afraid of us now," he said. "They used to laugh." "They still might," Viktor replied. "But they won't forget." The next morning, Viktor walked, slowly, leaning on a salvaged rifle stock as a cane, up the ridge where the final shots had been fired. He stood there for a long time, eyes sweeping the valley below. From this height, the scale of what they had done became clear. The footprints of the Ravager stamped into the snow, the scars of its weapons etched into the earth, the trail of craters and blood leading back to the bunker. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin, bent cylinder, one of the spent uranium shells. He turned it in his hand, then knelt and pushed it into the soil, marking the spot where the gun had stood. Around it, he arranged pieces of scorched plating, old bullet casings, a broken drone limb. It wasn't a monument. Not yet, but it was a beginning. When he returned to the bunker, Lena was already sketching something on the back of a ration box with a chunk of coal. A crude symbol, a hybrid of Earth's old military insignia and something newer, rougher, something born in the frost. "This," she said, holding it up, "is what they'll carry." Petro nodded. "We'll broadcast it across the mesh." And they did. Within days, it spread through the underground networks. An image of the gun, cracked and glorious, planted like a flag in the snow. Beneath it, in simple text, "We are still here." Other cells responded. Reports flooded in. Imperial patrols ambushed, slave camps overrun, old weapons refurbished and repurposed. Humanity was waking up, not as an empire, but as a fury, not united by policy or blood, but by memory, the memory of what had been lost, and what had just been proven. The next weeks passed in a blur of wind and preparation. Their valley became a beacon, a way station, a myth. Not all who arrived stayed. Some carried word to other fronts. Others brought tools, information, raw materials. One engineer came with plans to mass-produce the Gatling's design, combining old-world schematics with battlefield upgrades. Petro took him into the bunker, and they began to draft something new. Lena trained the newcomers, some barely more than teenagers, others older than Viktor. She taught them to move through snow like ghosts, to set traps without tech, to fire rifles with gloves stiff from frost. She didn't speak often, but when she did, they listened. Viktor remained near the ridge, watching the stars. His wounds healed slowly, but his presence stayed constant. The man who had spoken with bullets and survived the Empire's judgment carried weight far beyond what he intended. Still, he refused to believe himself a hero. One night, as the camp slept and the wind whispered low, Lena sat beside him. "We did it," she said. "No," Viktor replied. "We started it." She didn't argue. They sat in silence, beneath a sky too wide for comfort, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal and the slow beat of distant thunder that might have been another Ravager, or just the world turning beneath its weight. Eventually, Lena asked, "When they come again, will we be ready?" Viktor stared ahead, his expression unreadable. Then, without looking away, he answered, "We'll have an answer waiting." In the morning, the gun was uncovered from the snow, cleaned, and mounted upright once more. Not for battle, but as a reminder. Not of what had been destroyed, but of what had been defended. A plaque, cut from the hull of the Ravager, was bolted into the base. It reads simply, "Here," Steel sang, and tyranny fell. The wind blew across the valley, cold and sharp, carrying the words far beyond the mountains. And somewhere in the void, the Galactic Empire listened.